Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to our DevOps.com webinar for today, Moving at the Speed of Cloud Without Getting Owned. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you to our webinar. We have a really excellent webinar today on tap, and we've got some great guest speakers. But before we get started, I do have a couple housekeeping items that I do need to go over. First of all, this session is being recorded, so about 24 hours from now, the webinar will be posted on the DevOps.com website. So if you miss any or all of this webinar, feel free to take a look at it on demand afterwards. And we will be taking questions from the audience and going through those questions near the end of today's webinar. So if you have a question at any time during the webinar, please feel free to use the console there, control panel, and submit your questions. And I think with that, we also do have 2 polling questions. So we're hoping that you will help us out and take part during the webinar with those 2 polling questions. So we have, actually, if we could go back and just do quick introductions here with our 2 speakers today. Our first speaker is Davina Dewarma. She is the security engineer at Etsy. And then our other speaker is John Martinez, who's VP at Customer Solutions at Evident.io. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you both here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today's event. We're going to take a look at automation versus AWS Management Console, and then also discuss a little bit about the identity and access management, plus S3 bucket policies and alerting, logging and alerting, so you have proper visibility into your environment. All really interesting and I think very crucial elements in moving at the speed of cloud. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Davina, and she's got a great presentation, and I'll just turn it over to you. Thanks, Davina.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Davina Dhawan, and you're here for the talk, Moving at the Speed of Cloud Without Getting Owned, hopefully. This talk is really about what I did to strengthen Etsy's AWS foundation and how I was able to navigate a project with such a large scope. So you can email me at imacybercop@gmail.com and find me on Twitter at @theolzo, and I'll have these slides available there. And as previously mentioned, the recording for this webinar will also be available on DevOps.com. I'm an infrastructure security engineer at Etsy and have been with Etsy since January 2015, so for about 1.5 years now. Prior to Etsy, I lived in Chicago for 6 years and worked at Orbitz, the travel company, not the gum company, that was eventually acquired by a much larger travel company called Expedia. And I attended the University of Illinois in Chicago and have a degree in computer science with a minor in mathematics. Super happy to be here today speaking at DevOps.com. Woo! A little bit more about Etsy. Etsy operates a global marketplace where people all around the world connect both online and offline to make, sell, buy unique goods. Or where you can find me before every major birthday or holiday trying to find thoughtful presents for my friends and family. Security at Etsy is quite radical in that at its inception was already widely evangelized throughout the organization. Everywhere from product to systems engineering, security is a major part of decisions that are made, and it's even difficult to find a human that doesn't view security in a good light here. Mostly because of a program we like to call Security Candy, where we make candy available for the people who work at Etsy. This program exists to create a comfortable associations with security and the people on the team, so humans will come around to grab candy and may even have questions for us, or come around to talk to us about something that they're working on. The relationships that this candy builds is one really low-cost method of evangelizing security. That's probably a gross oversimplification of the work that was done by the creators of the security team at Etsy, but you can tell that Etsy is a magical place filled with unicorn engineers and is also a beautiful place to work. This talk is a general discussion on how to improve existing AWS infrastructure for those of you that have been or will be thrown into AWS headfirst. for those of you that have very little idea about how to clean this stuff up that came before you. The intention here is that if this happens to you as it happened to me, you'll have some action items right off the bat, so you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to read AWS doc after AWS doc, trying to figure out how to create security policies, as I did. I will have this talk, again, available at this bit.ly, so you don't need to write a bunch of stuff down if you don't want to. So when I joined Etsy, my director came to me with a very fun and exciting project, securing Amazon Web Services. And I was like, what? We have stuff in AWS. I had never worked with it before, and even Orbitz was mostly traditional bare metal. I did host my website using the free tier EC2 ones, and I was like, yeah, I'm super familiar with console, so I got this. I was like trying to reassure myself that I would be fine, and I was for the most part. To explain a little bit about our infrastructure at Etsy, it's mostly traditional bare metal with a minimal footprint in cloud infrastructure. Most tools are designed for our own hardware, and generally teams decide what their needs are and order hardware to those specifications. Previously, I'd mentioned how large the scope of this project was because when it was handed to me, we hadn't had a proper scoping at the time. And the reason for that is because when you're a growing company, you have humans that want to test things in various infrastructures, right? And I'm sure you experience this as well if you're a traditional bare metal. You go through acquisitions, you need to run external scans of your infrastructure. If you have contractors coming in to do things for you, you can't just give them access to everything either. So that's kind of how the clutter comes about. And at Etsy, that meant we knew of half of the actual root accounts that we had and maxed out the allotted number of S3 buckets on one of those accounts and had individual accounts for large chunks of the engineering organization. And to give you a better idea how things really should be done if you're kind of curious, most organizations have one root account and a few administrative accounts and don't really let the rest of engineering touch Amazon Web Services. It was pretty difficult to figure out where to begin, but luckily Etsy had purchased a tool called Evident.io. Evident.io runs regular security scans to see if there's misconfigured services. It details like high, medium, low risks in pretty big bold letters to make you feel better about yourself, and it gives you ways to remediate those issues, whatever they might be. So first, I started out looking at the high-risk issues. Most of them looked pretty serious because I was unfamiliar with a lot of the terminology. I had no idea what an ACL was at the time. Meh. So I started by creating a bunch of JIRA tickets for all the high-risk issues that I saw in Evident.io. JIRA is mostly just a way to organize what work needs to be done and by whom. I thought that that would be a good way to begin organizing what was rattling around in my brain. Also, it would be a good way for other parts of the organization to take a look at what progress was being made. When I sent emails, I wanted something to point people to, right? Once I had everything laid out, which took forever, I was getting a general understanding of how things looked from an Evident.io perspective. There were some things that looked like they might be low-hanging fruit, so I wanted to tackle them first because they would be the easiest. And that would be the password policy changes and the multi-factor auth registration and enforcement. It seemed like that would break the least amount of things too. Moving forward from that, I did want to set up some sort of logging and monitoring besides Evident.io, and there were some other EC2 networking rules that needed to be changed and some S3 things that needed to be clicked. Unfortunately, this is the one thing that doesn't quite fit our timeline, but I did want to talk about it really quickly. Scout 2 is a tool by the MCC group that you could also use rather than using Evident.io. It's totally open source and free. I like both of these tools for different reasons, and Scout 2 basically runs reports, and you can do it on a cron on whatever internal box that you have, and it just tells you the same thing, like what security or misconfigured policies that you have running around in your AWS infrastructure. This is less flexible in right out of the box, so basically you have to tie in all of your alerts manually, whereas Evident.io sends you a daily roundup email regardless of what configurations you've changed.
All right, looks like we have the first of two polling questions now to send along out to you. Our first polling question is launching now. What is the biggest AWS security issue that you encounter in your organization? The audience could go ahead and submit your answers. You can select from EC2 networking rules, S3 bucket policies, IAM access controls, MFA enforcement, or general ownership of services. We'll give you guys about 10 or 15 seconds longer to go ahead and submit your answer. And while we're waiting, I do want to remind the audience that if you do have a question for either of our panelists today, please feel free to submit them at any time during the webinar. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll starting right now. And here are the results. What is the biggest AWS security issue that you encounter in your organization? It looks like IAM access controls is the big winner at 32%. That's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that 3 others came in at 21%, EC2 networking and S3 bucket policies and general ownership of services. So Davina, I'm not sure if that's kind of jiving with what you guys experienced at Etsy as far as you know, what was the biggest issue with you guys?
Yeah, this is actually really fascinating to see, and I'm really glad that I asked this question because we also found that IAM access controls were an issue mostly because of just generally the ownership of services, right? And I think that that really coincides with a lot of ways that AWS is managed. And I did speak with some humans that work at Amazon Web Services, and they are completely aware of this issue. So we're going to talk about all of those different things momentarily.
When you were doing your AWS security big project there, was EC2 networking, was that actually something that you were dealing with as well?
I think the general issue was the fact that Amazon Web Services was not our main infrastructure, and so a lot of the knowledge of networking rules and stuff were done by people who wouldn't necessarily know anything about networking and just thought that that was totally fine. There were no default rules that were originally set up, which I ended up setting up later on. And so that makes it easier for a lot of other people having default rules available, and we'll talk about that momentarily. I would like to say that all of the animal imagery in my slide deck are animals from Etsy, and I have 2 pet rabbits, and that's why the rabbits exist, in case people are curious.
You know, I was wondering about that because there seemed to be an inordinate number of rabbits in this presentation. So that's and I will have to congratulate you on your use of the animals in the slides. I don't think we've ever had so many slides in one presentation.
Okay, cool. So we're going to start talking about low-hanging fruit. So password policies, multi-factor auth stuff. So as we begin our tale, an organized person may wish to set up proper documentation before making changes and alerting their entire organization, but my recommendation is just push. Work on being organized later, or you'll never really get to where you want to go since AWS is so huge. So rather than wait and create a bunch of documentation, I just started mashing all of the buttons required to create a password policy. And then I removed all of the AWS administrators that hadn't logged in a really long time. And in a really long time, I meant like years. So why start with the password policy? It honestly looked like the easiest evident IO alert to clear. It literally just required me to change a bunch of buttons on a system that I thought that nobody was using, and it also wouldn't prevent people from people's API keys from not working. So I modified this policy to be really stringent, you know, like 30 character passwords, and then checked all of the boxes. At Etsy, we use Dashlane, so people were able to just generate those passwords in Dashlane and then store them there. So first I sent an email to all of the humans that hadn't registered their accounts with multi-factor authentication, and the email read as follows. Hello, X. Looks like you still have not set up multi-factor authentication on your AWS account. Go ahead and do that by going to blah, 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 blah. Note, if you no longer need your AWS account, please let me know. And very few people responded to this email because of the lack of context, the lack of urgency. All of those things probably contributed to this. But I talked to my manager and he gave me a few recommendations. So the next time I sent an email, I attached my director to it along with a submission deadline. I wanted people to know I meant business, so I also attached a cat GIF, which is really important. It's called the cat tax for all of the people who don't know. If you're having some trouble evangelizing some project, send a cat GIF. During this time, I also allowed people to keep their accounts if they added two-factor auth and started a dialogue with people who were using AWS regularly. Oops, error, error, error. No one was able to register their two-factor auth anymore. In fact, the error message was the same for everybody. I had become the administrator that they needed to contact because they weren't authorized to be able to do things. So I was super freaked out. I broke stuff. In the process of securing AWS, I modified user permissions. If you recall, no one was an administrator anymore. Everyone was part of a group where they had minimal access based on potential utility. So if you want to create a few different policies right off the bat. And the one here is registering multi-factor authentication. This policy has a bunch of different statements, and the one that's listed here is how to deactivate and delete your own virtual multi-factor auth device. But as part of registering a multi-factor auth device, you need to have statements that are like resync your multi-factor auth device, deactivate, list all of the devices, and then the primary management and adding a multi-factor auth device. So as part of this, you have your SID, which is just a descriptor of your statement, what effect you want it to have, allow or deny, and then what action you want your resources to be able to take. Here you have a conditional as well, which is really fascinating. You only want to be able to deactivate your multi-factor auth device if you have one available. And you can also put in place a multi-factor auth enforcement policy, which is pretty hardcore. It will prevent any user from proceeding to services if they haven't enabled multi-factor auth already. And I quite like this because it, again, is a really good dialogue with users on how to do security in AWS. So now that all of that confusion was over and behind me, I was getting a better idea about how people were using Amazon, and it was able to take this information and create much better security groups. My original intention was to do role-based access, aka given you're a member of the data eng team, you'll use X, Y, and Z services in AWS. So everyone was on a particular team would have like the same access. Unfortunately, hindsight is a thing, and I would have much preferred a methodology where it was more role-based, such as having a few people actually needed access to some services in AWS. So if you needed full access to EC2 or whatever, you would just be in that group versus if you only needed access to one EC2 instance, right? And then something really important to consider is that you shouldn't be using your root API keys for all your stuff. So create application-specific keys, and then you can rotate them without breaking other applications. Considering that likely nobody looked at the security of AWS before you, those root API keys will be prolific, so it's going to take forever to clean that up. I quickly realized that I pretty much despise the AWS console, so rather than using it, I just tried doing everything using the AWS CLI tool, aka using AWS through the terminal, and then would create various different scripts that I was able to run in Python. You can create IAM groups with specific permissions. You can create users and assign them to pre-existing groups. Note that these users won't have passwords yet, so you may need to go in and assign passwords to people too, or you can email them. If you want to do bulk IAM creation, you can do this rather than clicking all the buttons. You can do the same thing with deletion. You could just create a quick script and delete a bunch of users. But deleting a user is also really fascinating. If you want me to cover that, I can cover that later. Another cool tool, an open source tool that I want to talk about is called Terraform by HashiCorp. Terraform is really, really convenient way of setting up static creds, shared cred files, and EC2 roles in AWS. So you give Terraform your own credentials, same thing with Scout 2. You just give it your access key and your secret key and some config file, and then specify what kind of creds you want it to spit out. So here, You have some specific user and the name and the resources you want it to have, and you can have a policy already created in AWS and tell Terraform that you want this CRED to have that particular group policy attached to it, and you can use this to create a lot of users pretty quickly, and actually use Terraform in order to create all of the Scout 2 accounts in all of my AWS root accounts. I didn't learn about this much later, but it's really nice to know about, so you can do it right from the beginning. So monitoring and general visibility is one of the most important components to security. If a resource is being touched, you want to know what has changed it, and if possible, by whom. I figured that logging would be something I would need to have in this new world order, so I started reading up about CloudTrail. Whereas Evident and Scout 2 are looking at misconfigurations, you can also very easily turn on CloudTrail, which allows you to log every single API call. Here, I have created a CloudTrail called Any Logs Would Be Nice, and that will give me all of the events which occur with regards to the S3 bucket called Golly. I've also created a new location for all of these logs called logs.golly. And this is basically what it looks like. So what you have is your event time, what the user who triggered the event is, the name of the event, the resource type, and the name of the resource. So here you have the root user enabled logging on CloudTrail, and the CloudTrail's name is Any Logs Would Be Nice. And I needed a place for these logs to go. Again, with a pure hatred for Amazon console, I went to go talk to the ops team. The infrastructure security team and the operations team work pretty happily together. I talked to operations and asked them if anything could be done with the logs that I had sitting in S3, and they told me they got it, and they totally did. Pretty soon I was able to see all of my logs in Kibana, but they weren't parsed properly. I just dealt with that later. Once you have logs and alerts from a scanner, you need an easy way to be able to digest them. Depending on what you have in your infrastructure, you can send daily roundup emails or high-risk emails only. It's entirely dependent on your capacity to manage these alerts and remediate them. You can also use some examples from Slack and Dropbox on how they leverage chat clients to remediate alerts. My recommendation, however, is if you have alerts sitting somewhere, that you put them all in one place. Etsy uses 411. 411 is an in-house tool that we built that basically queries Elasticsearch. And then we are able to get alerts, and depending on the severity of the alerts, it either like emails us or sends us a Slack notification. So you want to be able to gauge what needs to be done quickly and be taken care of first, because nobody has time to log into 4 different places to look at alerts. The next thing that was causing a lot of noise and Evident was ports being open on EC2 instances. This was really silly. I saw that certain instances were entirely available on all ports from all IP addresses, meaning that anyone in the world could interact with this instance on any port. In order to figure out what next steps were, I talked to the network operations team about what our internal IP space was, and I also talked to the teams that were responsible for these instances who told me what ports needed to be open for these systems. Honestly, though, figuring out who to talk to was the hardest part, and it sounds like 21% of you are also having that issue. It's very difficult to figure out what team created an instance and what team owned an instance, so I started tagging instances I want for later use. All in all, the general rule is you want to make sure that only the people who should be able to talk to something can. So word had gotten around, that someone on the security team was diving headfirst into the land of AWS. Engineers who were really curious about the platform started asking me questions and advice with regards to problems they were experiencing with our current infrastructure. They inquired about making instances, and I was going through the process of creating an instance where I learned more about EC2 roles. It was important for me to set up these EC2 roles on their behalf, so I was not limiting their usage of AWS services. And they didn't have to talk to me every single time they wanted to, create an EC2 instance. Similar to what we discussed with regards to IAM policies, you can do the same thing for EC2 instances. So what permissions does this one particular instance need? It's important that you set up your instances with roles to begin with, because you can't set up EC2 roles afterwards. So basically, an admin will create a role that grants access to the photos bucket in S3, and the developer can launch an instance with that role. The application retrieves role-based credentials from that instance, and then the application is able to acquire photos using those role credentials. S3 is the thing that caused the most amount of issues for Etsy, and we were getting a bunch of bug bounties because some of our S3 buckets were world readable or listable, and the best way to lock this down was by modifying bucket policies so that only the people who need to be able to see this bucket can see it. Are we noticing a theme here? So bucket policies are really interesting because it blows my mind that you're able to allow everyone in the world to mess with your bucket. It should be a little bit more difficult than just like clicking a button. So I have a bucket here called Golly, and it has some permissions turned on. So you can see the object access is read and write by all of the different users. So this says any authenticated AWS user. If you haven't learned this the hard way already, any authenticated AWS user actually means any authenticated AWS user, not just in your organization, and then everyone actually means everyone. So you should actually just look at any authenticated AWS user as everyone. And so when you have like 100 buckets and no logging or proper visibility, you need to go through every single one to verify its permissions, but you can use AWS CLI instead, which I highly recommend. You can just like use the AWS API tool and just create a script that just gives you all of that information right away. Cool, so now my recommendation is to build very specific policies in AWS, and the way you do that is first remove all of the access in the console. So you can unclick all of the buttons that you see there and start creating unique and granular policies, which you'll see on the next page. Under Bucket Policies Creator, you can see Bucket Policies, which is really, really nice. You can get about as granular as you want, and you can make it so that only, for example, the Deborah application can access this bucket. To be fair, this took me a really long time to figure out. Sometimes I would accidentally create policies that allowed global lists and not even realize it. So test your work. So as I mentioned earlier, we used to get a bunch of bug bounties by people reporting world listable and readable buckets on Etsy. And even though it was really just static image content, it was quite frustrating to figure out appropriate bucket permissionings. We didn't quite understand how people were able to figure out what our buckets were publicly listable, like a week after somebody had accidentally changed the configuration. It's because people were obviously running regular scans on us, and the scan they were running was S3 scan. So if you don't have any other scanners or visibility or anything, try using S3 scan. It's really lovely. If this is in case you haven't set up a wider scanner, but Scout 2 is pretty easy to set up, and it's also free, so highly recommend. So it happened to you. Like somebody, your director, your manager came to you and said, hey, turns out somebody's using AWS in our awesome infrastructure. What do I do now? So my recommendation is to write down all of the systems that you need to take care of. So you need to write down all of your knowns first, and likely you'll figure out like other parts of the organization are using things as well, and you'll just kind of figure that out along the grapevine. So you'll figure out what systems you need to fix on those systems as well, and you can use a visibility tool like Evident.io or Scout 2 for that. Over-communicate what you're doing, mostly because no one owns this thing right now, and you might want them to one day. You will. So start working with the networking team to lock down the network and how services are talking to one another, especially if you're running AWS Classic, like EC2 Classic, which doesn't already have networking things by default that it should. And you create default rule sets and roles that other people should start using when they start provisioning things. And work with Corp IT to handle account provisioning. It's really, really helpful. Corp IT or help desk or IT, whatever team you have that does that. And work with systems engineering or operations to handle provisioning of services like EC2, RDS, S3. And then get paid more money, because get a promotion, you know? You deserve it.
I like that last one for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope everybody learned something today, and I'm going to hand this over to John.
Thanks, Davina. Thank you for all of your awesome advice on securing AWS. Lots of super helpful best practices in your talk. And good morning, everybody from California. In my part of the talk, I'm going to be really quickly going over supporting a lot of what Davina was talking about, but more from a cultural perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between the SecOps and DevOps culture, and then how we could coexist happily together. I'm John Martinez. I've been doing computer work and server work for a very long time. I'm an old school Unix sysadmin from back in the day, and have been really fortunate to work as an engineer and as an engineering manager in some very large scale AWS implementations. Today I work for Evident.io as our VP of Customer Solutions and Success. So I spend a lot of my day talking to customers and also trying to perfect latte art. Just for the record, that's not mine. It's something I picked out, but I like to do a lot of latte art in my spare time. Next slide. So again, we're going to be talking about security, DevOps, and you, and how they're not incompatible with each other.
Okay, it looks like we've got a polling question before we get involved with your presentation too much farther. And here is the poll. We're going to go ahead and put that up now. How would you define the separation of security duties? You can select one of four answers. We've got all SecOps, mostly SecOps, but other teams help some. A good balance between SecOps and DevOps. And we sometimes think about security, which I hope nobody uses that one. So we'll give you guys about 20 seconds more to put your response in. Also, one more time, want to remind the audience that if you have a question for either of our panelists today, please feel free to get those in at any time, and we'll go over them near the end of the presentation. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll now. And sharing the results here, we've got, how would you define the separation of security duties? We've got a good balance between SecOps and DevOps is the big winner here. What do you think about that, that answer there? John, do you think that that's kind of par for course with most organizations?
Absolutely, yeah. It absolutely is. It's a matter of how do we balance out the shared security responsibilities in an organization. So it's
great. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and let you get back to it then.
Great. Thanks. So a couple of things before we get into the conversation to set it up. Basically, the two sides of the fence, the DevOps side and the security side, have a couple of needs and goals. We call these needs. Basically, the needs of DevOps are to go ahead and deploy, go ahead and maintain, and make sure that the reliability is there for the site, for the product, etc. And all of those needs are some that basically what we're asking for our DevOps teams today to do is to manage all of that in a very rapid fashion, and almost more than likely it's all done via some kind of automation. So it's all managed by a tool chain that has many different tools that go and manage and maintain our products today. So when it comes to security and IT, the security and IT folks, upon them we place the responsibility for stability, control, confidence in the company, risk aversion. Basically, we don't want problems to happen at large scale, or if they do, how do we manage, how do we mitigate, etc. So to engineering teams and DevOps teams, the security and IT folks are usually seen as the people that say no. A lot of times we call them the doctor knows in the organization. Can I have a connection, a direct connect connection between the data center and AWS? Probably the first answer should be no. So how do we make those two worlds collide with each other and coexist? So can we go to the next slide? So I call this, a lot of times we call this different things. Some folks call it shared responsibility model, etc. I call this the DevSecOps Club. How do we make sure that we coexist in a place where we're getting both of the needs met? So our ability to be agile and to go out and produce our products at a rapid pace, as well as stay secure and ahead of the curve from those issues that come up, especially in the cloud. So my 3 rules here are: don't wait for security to come to you, go chase it. Automate the security behaviors. So everything that makes up some kind of security issue, go and automate. And I'll get into these in a little bit more detail. And the last point, last rule of DevSecOps is to be a champion for the marriage of DevOps and security. So number 1, chasing security down. So this is my first rule. So here I have a couple of points. One is that, like I've said before, security is a shared responsibility. This is not in today's cloud world where developers are able to create infrastructure in minutes rather than weeks. Security has to be a shared responsibility. It's one that I, as a security person, have to make sure that I'm spreading that responsibility around. And to do that, I have to do a couple of things. I have to, number 1, give visibility to my operations and engineering folks as a security person. So as Davina pointed out in a few of her slides earlier, that visibility is super important to give to our internal customers. Being a security person, that would be our DevOps and developer folks. On the flip side, as a developer, you know, I shouldn't wait for the security folks to come to me. I call those security peeps. Basically, I want to make sure that I'm being proactive when it comes to security. So this comes to things like testing. When, you know, as a developer, I'm really good, or as a DevOps person, I'm really good at making sure that deploy goes out well tested ahead of time. I've got multiple environments where I graduate my deployments. You know, I've got dev, I've got staging, I've got production environments. So as part of my not waiting for security people to come to me, I'm going to go out and make sure that I'm being very proactive with my security testing as well. This also comes down to incidents, by the way. So if there's some kind of security incident, I'm going to own that security incident. I'm going to make sure that I'm being very communicative, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few slides down about that aspect of security and me being a responsible DevOps folks. So where do I begin? I think you can replace this slide pretty much with Davina's entire deck before me, but a really good place to also start that I recommend to people that are just starting out or have no clue where to begin in terms of security on AWS. The CIS AWS Foundations benchmark is a good place, which, by the way, Evident.io does help test and automate for you on your behalf. So let's get to the next slide, speaking of automation, for the second rule of DevSecOps Club, and that's to automate security. Why would I want to go and spend a lot of time automating my security behaviors? Number 1, I want to tighten up my window of opportunity. I basically want to make sure that the bots are working for me, and I want to make sure that I put my defenses up. And thirdly, you know, it's really the point that I want all of these bots to make sure that the attackers that are either trying to compromise my S3 buckets, like Davina talked about earlier, or trying to make use of that API access key that they've just discovered that they can get. I want to make sure that I'm alerted to, and that so my monitoring is automated, and I want to make sure that I'm able to quickly make sure that those compromised keys, etc., are not being put to worse use. So then comes the event-driven response, sorry. So I want to make sure that I am reacting in an automated fashion, And finally, I want to make sure that I'm enforcing in an automated fashion all of my policies and controls. So I'm not talking about compliance here necessarily, but it's one where I can take a security view to compliance and actively enforce those policies. I want to make sure as an operations person that I want to fix as soon as possible and deal with the consequences in the morning. 2 a.m. incident response is not the time to ask sort of the why questions. It's the I'm here at 2 in the morning trying to fix. So that's what I want to go and automate. So a couple of points on the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. On automating of basically automating difficult tasks. I want to make sure that I have visibility again across. If I'm going down the path of compliance, making sure that my reports are generated automatically on my behalf and are not some manual input in some spreadsheet. It's also going to make me and help me prioritize and identify my remediation program and my monitoring program. So again, at the very end, it's all about avoiding disruption and making sure that I have a stable environment. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a workflow on the automated policy enforcement that I talked about earlier. So the workflow goes from left to right, that I want to monitor my environments. That comes with visibility. I want to detect what's going on. I want to remediate in an automated fashion. And then finally, again, just like the 2 in the morning example, I want to notify and I want to be able to deal with the consequences after the fact. So on the next slide, I show really quickly a quick sample. Here at Evident.io, we do have some open sourced Lambda code that we definitely share with our customers and users, where you can go and really quickly get some of these functions so that you can start automating your incident response as we alert to you in Evident.io. So that's just one quick example. I know it's really hard to read that code there. And finally, on the cultural side, this is the last point of DevSecOps Club that I talked about. It's being the champion. So this goes around the entire organization. Goes for both sides. Teach your craft, security people. Definitely teach your developers and your DevOps folks how to do security, how to detect, how to run incident response programs. And if you're an engineer, definitely teach the security folks some of the automation tricks that you have up your sleeve. How to shorten the time for repeated tasks. And even give some pointers if your security folks want to learn how to write code in Python, for example. Definitely be available to them to learn a lot of that automation. And second point here is ask to be part of the incident response team. This mostly goes to the developers. I know the DevOps folks are certainly already very aware on how to react to production events. Security folks goes without saying on security incidents. Developers, if you're curious about how to go and triage security events, definitely ask to be part of that team. And if, for example, you make a human mistake, we all do, absolutely volunteer to be part of the incident team so that the security folks that are trying to triage and trying to do forensics on that particular security event don't have to go and ask a lot of questions or wait for you. Be part of the proactive side of things. And again, also the final point is that we want to be able to, at the end of the day, look at each other in our faces, and be proud of what we've built for our organizations and hug each other. So I call that at the very end, #HugSecOps. We want to be the cat and the pug that are hugging each other, like in the picture. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand it back.
You guys were great as far as getting as many animals as possible into the slides. I'm very impressed with that. So I do want to just remind the audience, we do have about 10 minutes now for question and answer for either one or both of our panelists. So I do have a couple in, but there is still time if you do have a question for either Davina or John, then please feel free to get them in, and we'll get to it immediately. But here's Davina, we've got a question here for you. The question is, what is the importance of visibility into your infrastructure?
Hi. Okay. Cool question. So the core parts of visibility are really so that you have them such that, so I think the point of the question is really to talk about why it's better to have visibility rather than just having automation that takes care of everything. And the reason why I would say that is because you want to make sure that you can identify deltas in your infrastructure so you can understand what your traffic actually looks like. And this isn't necessarily just related to AWS, but also with regards to your regular, because I'm more from an infrastructure perspective with regards to security. So I really like to see all of the alerts that come through every single day, regardless of whether they're just informational or not, or they're really high priority. And the reason is just because, well, example, malware, I want to see what people are clicking on, what kind of malware they're getting. And even though we already have a tool that just eradicates malware as soon as it comes onto your computer, I still want to see how malware is kind of proliferating itself throughout the organization. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and actually there's a follow-up question to that. Is automation important to leverage early on? I guess they're asking, really where in the process would be the best time to actually deploy automation?
I think automation deployment, or just doing automation in general, it's about as important as what you're building is. So for example, if you are incredibly new to Amazon Web Services and you really only have it for one thing or two things, and you don't really see it, becoming bigger than it is, then you don't need to automate anything, right? Because you're essentially spending a bunch of resources automating something that you're not going to be using that often. And depending on how many resources you have available on your team, you can, provide only that much to this particular project. So I think it's entirely dependent on how important that particular project is, especially in the long term. And then, of course, generally it is easier if it's a really important project, and you want to do a lot of things with that particular thing. Automation is very important to do early on. It's more important to spend a bunch of time automating something rather than spending a lot of time doing things one-off. So.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. John, I've got a question for you. Why don't traditional security approaches work in a DevOps environment? So that's actually an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it depends, right? I think it depends what type of traditional security approaches. Really what it comes down to is the fact that in the cloud, you basically have programmatic infrastructure. So when infrastructure becomes as easy to launch as, say, just a quick click of a button in the AWS console, or even more advanced launching, for example, a CloudFormation stack that automatically pretty much literally can build an entire virtual data center for you in a matter of minutes. It becomes a place where your traditional sort of tools that assume that resources are long-lived and non-ephemeral pretty much go out the window, right? So you have to take a different approach and employ security tools that are able to keep up with ephemeral resources. Elasticity, basically my environment is going from 100 EC2 instances to 2,000 EC2 instances in a matter of minutes. et cetera. Basically take all of that into account. So you have to look at security from a speed and elasticity and an ephemeralness perspective. So that's a lot of the reason why traditional security tools fail, and you have to kind of employ this new army of new DevOps and cloud tools.
Oh, all right, great. Thanks, John. Davina, I'd like to actually get your perspective on this as well, because you know, obviously with your background in security, I imagine you've got hopefully, you know, a little different perspective from John, and you might be able to shed a little bit more light on the subject.
Yeah, sure. Can you repeat the question really quickly?
Yeah, sure. It's why don't traditional security approaches work in a DevOps environment?
So the way that I hear this question is traditional security as an emphasis. So traditional security is a huge blocker, and that is kind of the reason why having a culture like Etsy where security engineers never say no, that is like basically a policy that we have. We do a yes, but, you know, and we kind of really work with you to figure out what your ask is in order to get what you need done in the most secure way possible. In a DevOps environment, essentially what you have is developers that are also operations engineers, and then operations engineers that are also developers, so that everybody is kind of speaking the same language. And that, I think security fits in really beautifully in that. That's why you have DevSecOps, right, is because now you have developers that not only understand security and operations, but you also have operations engineers who understand security. And having every single one of those groups essentially evangelizing security in their own way is really nice. But I know that a lot of people are currently working in workplaces that are that have more traditional security, which is where security is a huge blocker and say no all the time without any reason, and are also plugged in really heavily into operations where, you know, you don't get your networking rules granted to you every single time, and that without any explanation. That's quite frustrating. So hopefully that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then it gives some sort of insight onto what traditional security is like.
Yeah, exactly. So we're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, but I do have a question that looks like it's actually to both of you, and that's it's really about the understanding of security and the importance of it. And so the question is, do you think your teams actually understand the importance of security now, or do they still kind of consider it a nuisance? Well, I'm not sure who wants to take it first. How about John? John, you go first.
Sure. So the question is, do my teams understand security?
Yeah, or do they just still see it as, or the importance of security, or do they just kind of see it as, you know, one more hurdle that they have to get over every day?
Well, I think maybe the answer to that, I would say it's gotten better. I think with security incidents, you know, at really large scale, or the public security incidents have kind of brought the concern to the forefront in most people's mind, especially in the IT world. But I think we definitely still have a long ways to go to implement modern security, as sort of, you know, to Davina's last point. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity to improve, but I think in terms of awareness, I think I would say a lot of people are very aware these days.
Okay, Davina, what do you? I mean, you guys obviously are, as you said in your webinar, you guys are very security focused, but, you know, do you still kind of get some pushback from the folks that you work with who just still see it as kind of a nuisance and something I have to deal with?
Not at all, actually. You know, whenever we're working on a particular project, and as I mentioned during the slide with the security candy, it often the reason why people need to talk to security first is because security really needs to touch the entire organization, and they can't chase after every single team to figure out if there's new projects that are going on that impact security. So building relationships is equally important from other teams, like operational teams or product teams, it's equally as important that they talk to security as important it is that security talks to them. And at Etsy, that's really magnificent the way that security has been evangelized, and we do this thing called boot camps where when you first start at Etsy, you can like go to a bunch of different teams and kind of try them out before you start working. And those really help evangelize security too, because then you get people from different product teams working on security, and then they're always kind of remembering like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go talk to the security team because we're working on this project that might impact security. So I think that I've only ever worked at companies where security has been generally pretty well evangelized. So I'm sorry to see everyone's frustration with the traditional security.
Okay, well, we are up at the top of the hour now, so I do want to thank Davina Dewan and John Martinez, Davina with Etsy and John with Evident.io, for being our panelists on today's webinar. Lots of really good information, and again, I must apologize for the technical difficulties that we had, but as I said before, this webinar is being recorded, so we will have it online, hopefully all synced up for, I would say, within about 24 hours or so. But again, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you.